What could be more painful than having more than $800 million your possession, but having to face a tearful last chapter? One note from Céline Dion once caused the entire world to hold its breath. She sang of love's power, as if all wounds could be healed by love alone. Everybody's hearts ached for her, and she gave the world "My heart will continue to grow." However, there was a quiet that no one could hear beneath each applause. There is a body quivering with disease behind every glistening robe. A woman singing with unfathomable sadness may be heard behind the thunderous clapping. Her voice weighed the burden of unfulfilled goals, lost love, and inner suffering concealed by outward perfection. The amount of money she leaves behind is just astounding, roughly $800 million. It demonstrates not only her voice, but also her unwavering determination. 250 million records were sold. Residences in Las Vegas that changed the course of entertainment history. An empire of perfumes, fashion endeavors. Real estate that covers the entire map, much like a dream's chapters. A French chateau on a private island in Quebec, worth $25.5 million. A $72 million Bahamian-inspired house in Jupiter Island. And a tranquil mansion in Nevada, now worth $4.5 million, where the sound of her children's laughter still reverberates down golden hallways. She has a Cadillac Escalade, a Mercedes-Benz 350, and a Maybach 62 in her garage. Every car is a silent observer of both heartbreaking and triumphant occasions. Her $42 million Bombardier Global Express was not merely a luxury aircraft. It was her method of avoiding sadness while pursuing her responsibilities, of being both everywhere and nowhere. However, riches is not the subject of this tale. Every dollar in that fortune bears the mark of a sacrifice, so it's about the weight that goes along with it. A performance following the death of her true love. A tour went ahead despite deteriorating health. As her body cried out for slumber, a voice strained to its breaking point. She created more than just an empire. It is a testament to tenacity. However, it is impossible to quantify what she sacrificed. Additionally, her family does not perceive assets as they silently stand in front of the legacy she is leaving behind. Behind them, they can see the woman, a mother who devoted herself to them, an unreasonably loving wife. Every note was infused with the artist's essence. Consider writing a tribute below if your music has ever supported you at a time of heartache. For the voice that carried us when we were unable to carry ourselves. Even one like is a small gesture of appreciation. How terrible it is to join the world surrounded by music, yet devoid of all other things. On March 30, 1968, Céline Marie-Claude Dion was born in Charlemagne, Quebec, a small working-class village. She was the youngest of 14 children in a wealthy but song-filled home. Both of her parents were musicians. Yes, there was harmony throughout the house, but it was the kind that reverberated off of empty cabinets and barren walls. Not enough space, not enough food, and not enough warmth. At first, her crib wasn't really a crib. It was a blanket-lined drawer that had been taken out of a wooden cabinet. At that moment, it had nothing but melody to cling to, but it held a newborn who would one day move millions. They didn't sing her lullabies. They were heard. Late at night, when the cold seeped through the floorboards, she heard notes floating from her siblings' rehearsals. Sen's life was anything but comfortable from the moment he took his first breath. It has to do with perseverance, and something uncommon and astounding was created as a result of that endurance. She sang at her brother's wedding when she was 5 years old. Her voice had already begun to cut through the cacophony of poverty, not as a novelty act. Her singing was not a pastime. She sang as if it were her only hope. By the age of 12, she started working with her mother to write songs and her brother, Michel, to record demos. They only made one cassette, which they submitted to a Montreal music producer named René Angel. He cried when he heard her voice. He claimed that it was an angel's voice. Then he did something nobody saw coming. In order to finance her debut album, he mortgaged his only residence. It wasn't business. That was faith. The real pressure was not fame, not awards, and not survival, but rather the weight of 14 mouths that had once eaten slices of bread cut in thirds. The debt Renee had staked his life on, and the hope that if her voice could rise high enough, they might never be cold again. Despite all of that, she soared. Her voice became a generation's heartbeat, but that rise, so brilliant, so unwavering, started in a small room with a young girl singing just loud enough to drown out her own hunger, a child who knew no luxury, no vanity, just music and the need to be heard. It didn't start with applause, the Titanic, or the palaces of Las Vegas. I would sleep in a drawer again if it meant I could still sing. And that is the kind of spirit that cannot be trained, only born. The girl who was cradled in a drawer didn't rise alone. Destiny had already chosen her protector. Sale would recall those early years in later interviews with a kind of aching reverence rather than bitterness. His belief in her, before she ever believed in herself, ignited a fire that never went out. And that fire turned into albums, sold-out tours, Grammys and Oscars. Renee did more than just steer her career. He became her anchor, her great love, and her shield against a world that would demand more and more of her until she had almost nothing left to give. What makes her story so unbearably powerful is not that she won, but rather how much of herself she gave up so that others could believe in miracles. Her voice was never just a sound, it was a bridge. All of it, every award, and every dollar was founded on a foundation of unseen wounds and silent sacrifices. From a drawer to the world stage, from poverty to power, from silence to global symphonies. People will remember the anthems, the accolades, and the standing ovations over the years. But they must never forget the little girl who began it all, not with wealth or connections, but with a hunger so loud that everyone had to listen. She first met him when she was 12 years old, a timid, frail girl with eyes that hadn't learned to dream too far and a voice too large for her body. However, sometimes, even during the most severe winters of childhood, life plants a quiet miracle. One person, one moment that changes the course of everything. His name was René Angel, and he was a respected figure in the music industry, a man of experience. 26 years her senior, and the first to see her not as a child with potential, but as a soul already carrying greatness. Something inside of him exploded when he pressed play on her demo cassette. He did not hear polish. The act of putting his own house on the line to finance her first record was not business. It was belief. It was not a contract. It was the calm thunder of destiny playing out in real time. He heard purity. He heard a truth so raw that it made him cry. He became her protector in a world that was never kind. From that point on, what they created together was more than just a career. It was a heaven, a trust that was forged through fire. Renee stayed in the background, silent and steady, protecting her spirit from the weight of expectation and the glare of fame. When she was tired, he carried her. He became the steady breath behind every note she sang, and slowly, imperceptibly, that trust turned into tenderness, and that tenderness turned into love. At 19, she poured her heart out in a handwritten letter, confessing the feelings she had long suppressed. He spoke for her when she was unsure, and he stepped in to shade her when the lights burned too hot. She once remarked, "He was the only man who made me feel safe enough to be entirely myself." Their love blossomed softly and privately at the age of 20, not to fool the world, but to save something delicate that the world would never comprehend. Their bond was a heaven, not a scandal, and when she eventually came clean to the public, she defied criticism, skepticism, and misinterpretation. Her love wasn't a passing fad, not because she was rebelling. She used it like a compass. They were married in 1994 in a ceremony that resembled a religious vow more than a social gathering at Montreal's Grand Radam Basilica. She chose devotion with all of her heart, not as a world-renowned figure, when she walked down the aisle. There was never any noise in their marriage. It was bright. Despite its flaws, it was incredibly faithful. René was more than just her spouse. He was the father of her children, her manager, her emotional support system, and her mirror. He was her anchor when life threatened to veer off course, her calm in the midst of upheaval, and her balance. She wasn't deciphering lyrics when she sang about love. She was giving testimony, bearing witness to endurance, devotion, and a type of love that becomes stronger with each adversity it endures. Together, they created a life that was both domestic and spiritual, a world of murmured good nights, globe tours, Grammys, and baby bottles. Every time she received a standing ovation, he was backstage, hoping she would shine but never requesting praise. And she shone, but she was constantly aware of the reason. Because his hand was behind her voice. He had faith behind her bravery. She gave it all to him. She never once wavered in her job, loyalty, or youth. For her, the glamour did not equate to love. It was waiting. Nobody was looking, and it was during the quiet hours. While the world pursued headlines, the little things that made a difference established a life. Tabloids were not the intended audience for their love story. It was constructed to last forever. In the gentle perseverance of day after day, year after year, of picking each other when no one else was looking, rather than in audacious confessions. She commented in subsequent interviews, saying, "He was my sole love. His love and belief in me impacted every aspect of who I became." Céline Dion didn't pursue fame with flash or scandal. Instead, she built it breath by breath from pain, from hunger, from a place deeper than ambition. Her voice wasn't trained, it was endured. Even now, when the spotlight only shows one figure on stage, Céline knows deep down that she has never stood alone. When she sang, time didn't just stand still, it listened. When a poor girl from Quebec entered the world of English language music in 1990, it wasn't just a new album, it was a risk. Executives doubted her, made fun of her accent, and said that French singers weren't supposed in American pop. Every note held in perfect pitch was once held in silence. Where Does My Heart Beat Now cracked the US top 5. Not because the world was ready, but because Céline forced it to listen. Céline didn't break. She tightened her tone, bent her vowels, and let her voice do what words couldn't. She wasn't supposed to belong, but she made herself impossible to ignore, and that was just the beginning. In 1992, her duet on Disney's Beauty and the Beast transformed a cartoon into an emotional reckoning. The Oscar didn't matter. What mattered was that kids cried, parents paused, and lovers held each other a little tighter. That's what Céline always wanted. Her voice transcended oceans, broke barriers, and melted through language and culture. My Heart Will Go On was more than just a song. It was survival. It became the anthem for loss, for memory, for the kind of love that endures long after breath is gone. The song won an Academy Award and a Grammy, and it sold over 30 million copies. Then, in 1997, a ship sank again, and the world drowned in her voice. The world didn't see how lonely it was at the top. The magazines didn't show her collapsing backstage from exhaustion. The cameras didn't record standing ovations. The migraines, the vocal injuries, the nights she couldn't sleep because the next day demanded more. But behind the trembling vibrato, there was a woman already starting to break. Over 700 shows, over $600 million in ticket sales. But the real currency wasn't dollars, but souls. Over 3 million people sat in her presence and felt seen. Her voice didn't just echo in theaters. Céline made it sacred when she accepted a residency in Las Vegas. In 2003, despite critics calling it a career graveyard. Her concerts weren't just performances, they were confessions, mass, therapy, and a heaven for strangers who were barely hanging on. She didn't simply sing. She bled artistically. Her reality behind the curtain was becoming darker even as her voice rose. It healed wounds, expressed what others couldn't, and held strangers who were barely hanging on. Something inside her started to slowly and quietly wither, like a rose fading in a locked room. But she never left. She stood before presidents, walked through the fire in stilettos, her face illuminated by spotlights, her heart burning from the inside out, while fans chanted her name and she was fending off rumors of illness behind designer gowns and rehearsed smiles. Her empire grew beyond music, perfumes, fashion lines, and international tours, and her net worth surpassed $500 million. But wealth was never her ultimate goal. She opened Olympic ceremonies and shook hands with royalty, but none of that compared to the quiet triumph of singing lullabies to her sons when no one else was around. She gave pieces of herself to millions and never stopped giving. Her strength was not just in her vocals, but in her endurance. She didn't rise by chance. Her true riches were measured in goosebumps, in silent tears, and in letters from fans who survived heartbreak or cancer because her songs told them they weren't alone. Even as the industry changed, trends faded, and critics circled, Celine remained unflappable and unrepentant. She never needed to reinvent herself because she was already unique. Nevertheless, as she stood in sold-out arenas with orchestras below and pyrotechnics behind her, her thoughts frequently strayed to more subdued topics. And with it, half her spirit unraveled. The aisle stretched like a lifetime. The pew next to her screamed with absence. The air itself refused to breathe. Her eyes hollowed instead of crying, and as she sat beneath the same stained glass where they had once sat forever, she realized that she was now the keeper of both halves of that promise. She entered Notre Dame Basilica, the same place where they had once vowed eternity, and this time she walked alone. She stood there, not to perform but to honor, because that is who she is, a woman molded by melody but fortified by melancholy. This was not just sadness, it was soul rupture, it was loss. It was a series of farewells so poignantly timed that even angels would have cried. Before the cameras ever caught Céline Dion's public heartbreak, before the world saw her draped in black and drowning in headlines, she had already experienced a quieter sorrow. And even though the world remembers the songs, the gowns, and the lights, it must also remember that behind the curtain stood a woman carrying two funerals in one heart, walking through darkness with nothing left but faith, and somehow finding the strength to sing without breaking. It was a grief she carried alone years ago, like a secret song stuck in her chest, written for a child who never got to grow up. Her name was Céline Dion, and she was Celine's niece, 16 years old, fragile, radiant, and born into a war she never chose. It was a grief that made no noise, no news, and no ripple beyond the walls of a hospital room. The world fell in love with Celine's soaring voice, but she would frequently trade the spotlight for bedside, holding Carine's hand in hospital rooms with beeping monitors instead of stage lights, whispering lullabies through the hum of oxygen machines, hoping that her songs could somehow breathe life where medicine had failed. Cystic fibrosis is a disease that slowly squeezes the lungs and erases futures in silence. The world didn't stop when Carine died. There were no headlines or breaking news. But Céline didn't need a press release because she had a piano and she had her sadness. Carine loved music and she loved Céline, but love couldn't stop the clock. Vie, the French word for fly, was not written for albums or applause. It was Céline's last gift, a lullaby folded in pain, a prayer made of melody, a farewell letter sealed in music. And she poured it into a song so tender, it felt like a soul letting go in slow motion. She breathed the note by trembling note. Fly, fly, little angel, far from this cruel world. Vie never made it to the top of the charts, but is still one of her most revered songs, because it was true, not because it was well known. Even now, decades later, there is a lingering pain beneath every ballad she sings, a softness in her tone, a sigh between syllables, as if she is still singing to Carine through the veil of time. Fly toward the light, the peace, the tenderness you've always deserved. The lyrics weren't written for the masses. They were whispered to the stars. For Céline Dion, motherhood was never a silent blessing. Rather, it was a promise etched in melody that true love doesn't end when the body does, but instead finds wings and learns to fly. Some of it lives in lullabies, in unlit candles, and in silences too sacred to name. Under the gowns that glittered under stage lights, beneath the anthems that rocked arenas and healed strangers across oceans. There was a woman whispering prayers into the darkness, pleading with the universe for one thing: to carry life, to hold a child who shared not just her blood, but her heartbeat. It was a war waged in silence, a dream carved through blood, longing, and sleepless nights where not even the stars could provide solace. The world cheered her voice, but it never saw the bruises on her belly from injections. And it never heard the click of syringes at dawn. Céline wanted to give them both a fresh start, a family, after marrying René Angel, the man who had risked everything to give her a voice. However, nature was unforgiving, never understood the agony behind the staged grin she wore on red carpets. The sound of René Charles's heartbeat in 2000 was the miracle that changed everything after years of IVF, 2 surgeries, and many hormone therapies. Suffered with the silence of a soldier at war. The birth of him in January 2001 was more than just a birth. It was the result of all the invisible tears she had shed. Every night she had curled up with emptiness and dreamed of holding a future in her arms. But the dream was flimsy. In 2009, while everyone believed she was busy recording, Céline had a miscarriage that broke her heart in private. Céline was never the type to give in to sadness. And in 2010, at the age of 42, following another round of IVF, and more like a supplication, she gave birth to twins Nelson and Eddie. No headlines, no statements, just grief, thick and choking behind tour curtains and hotel walls. As she stood on stages, singing lullabies to millions, while mourning the lullabies she never got to sing to that unborn child. She flew higher than most, but her feet were always grounded. Despite the pain of standing, even when it meant trembling under the weight of everything she had lost. She refused to let tragedy silence her from the death of her mother, TZ, her brother Daniel, her husband René, and her personal health struggles. She has stopped trying to conceal her health in recent appearances. She does appear thinner and move more slowly, but her eyes still have the same fire. And she tells the world, "If I can't run, I'll walk. I'll crawl if I can walk, but I won't give up." It is a gospel for every person who is fighting to survive, not a show. Her voice may crack and her hands may shake, but her silence roars louder than fame ever could, because her songs still fill wedding halls and funeral chapels, still echo in quiet cars at midnight, and still bring peace to people who have never even seen her face. She is no longer chasing applause. She has long outgrown it. Her story is not about vocal range, but about courage. She doesn't need to sing them anymore. They've become ingrained in the world's bloodstream. And in this noisy world where meaning is frequently replaced by volume, Céline teaches us about the power of stillness. She remains timeless in a music industry that is obsessed with reinvention, not because she followed trends, but because she stayed true to herself. It is the narrative of a lady who held a microphone in one hand and her children, her anguish, her grief, and her faith in the other. It is about singing when your voice breaks, about mothering when your heart is broken, and about loving when the world offers you reasons to shut down. We must keep in mind that greatness is not determined by sold-out stadiums, but rather by the grace you display when no one is looking. Now, we ask you, those who have found solace in Céline Dion songs, who have walked through storms with her voice in your ears, what does she mean to you? Which of her songs lifted you higher in your brightest moments or wrapped around your soul in your darkest hours? Please leave a comment below. Share your memories because even when she's unable to sing it herself, your voice, your tale, and your heart are all part of the chorus that keeps her song alive.